In 1980, I was 27, a night shift nurse at St. Luke's Hospital in Milwaukee. My name then, as now, was Mary Hansen. I rented a small one-bedroom apartment above a bakery that started kneading dough at 4 every morning. The scent of yeast and sugar filled my nights. I used to tell myself I was lucky I had work, independence, and a routine. But the truth is I was lonely. The loneliness ended, or so I thought, the day I met Joshua. He was 5, the quiet boy on the pediatric floor whose parents had died in a car crash on a 94. I had been his nurse for 2 weeks before the social worker asked if I would consider fostering him. The words came out of her mouth before I had time to think. Yes, I said, surprising even myself. Within a year, I adopted him legally. Joshua Hansen, my son. He had a thin scar above his left eyebrow and a way of holding his breath when he was afraid. I learned to recognize the signs, the small tremors, the silences that stretched too long. I told myself I could make him feel safe. That was all that mattered. I worked every overtime shift the hospital offered. I packed his lunches in brown paper bags with notes inside. "You are loved." I saved for private school, piano lessons, summer camps, things I never had. Every penny that passed through my hands had his future written on it. People asked why I never remarried. I always said I was too busy. The truth was more complicated. I was afraid any man I brought into the house would disturb the fragile sense of family Joshua and I had built. So I stayed single. My life became a circle that began and ended with him. For 25 years I lived that way. He grew tall, handsome, and polite. He graduated from college in Madison, shook my hand at the ceremony and said, "Thanks, Mom. You did everything." I believed him. "Before we start, where are you watching from?" And hit like if you've ever given everything, and got silence in return. Joshua was 32 when he met Emily Holmes. She was from one of those Madison families who had their names on buildings. Her mother, Linda, owned a successful real estate firm. The first time I met them, Emily had the kind of confidence that comes from never having to ask twice for anything. She smiled too easily, as if politeness were a performance she had practiced since childhood. They came to my apartment for dinner one Sunday. I had made roast chicken, potatoes, and a lemon pie. Emily complimented the meal and the neatness of my home. But then in the same breath she said, "You must be so organized, living alone all these years. I wish my mother could be like that, though she never had to work night shifts." Joshua laughed. I smiled and cleared the plates. The remark stayed with me all night. In the weeks that followed, there were other small comments, light as feathers, sharp as needles. When I called Joshua, Emily often answered. "He's busy, Mary," she would say, using my first name like we were colleagues. "He'll call you later." But later seldom came. The calls grew shorter, the visits rarer. When they did stop by, I could sense the change in his tone, the new polish in his sentences. He began to talk about networking, about making impressions. He had started wearing cufflinks, a gift from her father. One evening when I asked about his job at the accounting firm, he sighed and said, "Mom, you worry too much. Emily says I need to set boundaries. You get intense sometimes." Intense. That word struck me like a slap. He had used it before, years ago, when he was 16 and angry about a curfew. "You're too intense, Mom." It was the same voice now, but older, rehearsed. Emily's voice echoed behind it, shaping his. Linda Holmes began calling him our Joshua. She invited him to family brunches and real estate events. I never received an invitation. When I ran into them once at the farmer's market, Linda smiled like a hostess greeting an unexpected guest. "Oh, Mary. How nice to see you. Joshua tells me you still live in that little apartment." That little apartment. Joshua stood beside her, adjusting his watch band. "Yeah, Mom likes simple things," he said, not meeting my eyes. That night I stood by the kitchen sink, staring at my reflection in the window. The city lights blurred behind the glass. I could hear the bakery downstairs clattering with trays again. I wondered when my son had learned to be embarrassed by where he came from. Still, I tried to be understanding. Love, I told myself, can make people foolish. Perhaps Emily's family made him nervous. Perhaps he wanted to impress them. I excused what should not have been excused. Then one afternoon in late 2019 my phone rang. Joshua's name lit up the screen, the first call in weeks. His voice was cheerful, practiced. "Mom, can I stop by tonight? Need to talk about something important." He arrived around 7, wearing a tailored coat I had never seen before. He carried himself like someone rehearsing for a meeting. I poured him coffee and waited. He cleared his throat. "Mom, we're a little short on the wedding budget." I set my cup down. "How short is a little?" He hesitated. 20,000. The air in the room went still. "That is all my savings," I said quietly. "All of it." "I know," he said quickly. "It's just temporary. We'll pay you back after the honeymoon. You'd be helping us start our life right." Helping. The same word I had heard from him since he was a child. "Help me with this, Mom. Help me get there." I looked at his face, at the familiar shape of his mouth, the way his hair still curled slightly at the back of his neck like it had when he was a boy. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my checkbook. "How much exactly?" I asked. He exhaled with relief. 20,000. "Well, 20,840 if you can." That was the precise sum in my savings account. 40 years of double shifts, skipped vacations, and careful meals. Money I had put aside for medical care, for a quiet retirement, for peace. I signed the transfer papers the next morning at the bank. The teller congratulated me on the big occasion. I nodded, unable to speak. Weeks passed. I received no thank you card, no message. When I called to ask how the planning was going, Emily answered. "Everything's coming together," she said. "Linda's handling most of it. You've been a big help." Then the line went dead. The word help again. I waited for an invitation, for a conversation, for some acknowledgement. None came. Instead, I received an email from a hotel confirming a payment under my name. The same hotel where, according to a local magazine article, the Holmes family was hosting a lavish private event. That evening I sat at my kitchen table and read the receipt line by line. Venue rental, catering deposit, floral arrangements. The total matched my transfer almost exactly. I had given him my life savings, and now I could see in black and white what it had purchased. A party I was not even sure I would be welcome at. Still I waited. Mothers wait. A week before the wedding, the phone rang again. Joshua's voice sounded strained. "Mom, listen. Emily thinks the guests might make you uncomfortable. Maybe it's better if you don't come." For a moment I could not speak. The bakery downstairs was silent. Even the street outside seemed to hold its breath. "I gave my life savings for your wedding," I said softly. "And now you are telling me not to come?" He started to say something, but I ended the call. On the wedding day I dressed anyway. I set the invitation box on the table and sat beside it until the daylight faded. The clock ticked, the air smelled faintly of sugar from the bakery, and I listened to the distant hum of cars heading somewhere I was not invited. That was the day I learned a truth I had never wanted to face. Love without respect becomes debt. And I was done paying it. A month after the wedding, winter settled over the city. The air had that sharp metallic edge that comes before snow. Most mornings I sat by the window with a cup of coffee, staring at my checkbook. $42.18. That was all I had left. 40 years of double shifts, skipped meals, and careful saving, gone in one wire transfer. One gray morning, I opened the small fireproof safe my father had left me. Inside were things I had not touched in decades. His old union card, my nursing diploma, and a folder marked Property and Bonds 1964. The paper was brittle, the ink faded, but the numbers were still clear. General Electric shares, 2U.S. savings bonds, and a small parcel of land near Madison. I spread everything out across the kitchen table and started adding the numbers. The total came to about $740,000. For a long moment I just sat there, stunned. I had lived my entire adult life counting pennies, believing thrift was a kind of safety. And all that time, this quiet fortune had been waiting in a drawer. That afternoon I called my lawyer, Mr. Reed. He was older now, with less hair and slower speech, but he still had the kind of calm that made people tell the truth. I laid the papers in front of him like evidence. He adjusted his glasses and said, "Mrs. Hanson, this is significant. Have you thought about what you want to do with it?" "Yes," I told him. "I want to rewrite my will." He hesitated. "Including your son?" "No," I said. "Removing him." He looked at me for a long time, then nodded. "All right. Then let's make it clear. Over the next few meetings, we drafted every line carefully. The new document created the Hansen Fund for Adoptive Mothers, a program to help women who raise children not their own. Each would receive a small grant, enough to cover rent or tuition or just a little peace of mind. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. When the papers were done, I signed them with a steady hand. The pen moved across the page like a closing door. That night, I slept without waking once. A few days later, Joshua called. His voice was cautious, polite, almost formal. Mom, can we come by? Emily and I want to talk. They came that Saturday. I met them outside. Not at my old apartment, but in front of the new house I'd bought with a portion of my inheritance. It was small but modern, with wide glass windows and a view of the lake. A gray Tesla sat in the driveway, catching the winter light. Joshua stopped on the path and stared. Mom, where did all this come from? From the life you stopped paying attention to, I said. Inside, I poured tea and let them take in the silence. Emily glanced around, trying to sound casual. You've done well for yourself. We're just surprised, that's all. I didn't mention it before, I said. Because when I tried to talk to you, you were always too busy. Joshua shifted in his chair. Mom, we made mistakes, but cutting me out of your life? That's extreme. Extreme, I repeated quietly. Extreme is asking for your mother's life savings, and then uninviting her from the wedding she paid for. He looked down. That wasn't my idea. No, I said. But you agreed to it. Emily crossed her arms. You're overreacting. We didn't want you to feel out of place. I am never out of place in my own life, I answered. Joshua's voice rose, desperate. But I'm your son. Then why do you act like a creditor? The room went very still. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. Emily's eyes flicked to him, searching for what to say next, but there was nothing left to say. I walked to the sideboard, took out a sealed envelope, and placed it on the table between us. You should see this, I said. It's my new will. The money will go to a foundation for adoptive mothers, women who give without expecting repayment. He stared at the envelope, pale and speechless. You really did this? Yes, I said. And you need to know it's final. He swallowed hard. You're cutting me off completely? I'm setting you free, I said. That's different. Emily stood abruptly. We're done here. Joshua lingered a moment longer. I didn't mean to hurt you, Mom. I know, I said. That was always the problem. You never meant to, but you did. They left without another word. I watched them walk down the path, their figures small against the snow. When the car disappeared around the curve, I stood for a long time by the window. The lake was frozen solid. The world was quiet. I didn't feel triumphant or bitter. Just steady, like something broken inside me had finally settled into place. Over the next few months, the phone calls stopped. The noise stopped. In its place came quiet, real restful quiet. The first grants from the Hansen Fund went out that spring. I read the letters from the women who received them. A teacher in Racine, a waitress in Kenosha, a single mother in Eau Claire. One of them wrote, "Because of you, my son can join the school band." I framed that sentence and hung it above my desk. Sometimes I still think of Joshua as the boy who held my hand crossing the street. The boy who once said, "You did everything." Maybe I did. But I learned something too. Love without respect turns into debt. And debt eventually has to be paid. I had finally settled mine. Spring came early that year, soft and bright, as if the world itself had decided to start over. I spent my mornings on the porch, sipping coffee and listening to the water move beneath the ice on the lake. Peace had its own rhythm, slow, deliberate, honest. Then one Saturday afternoon, I saw a silver car turn up the drive. I knew the sound of its engine before I saw it. Joshua's. He and Emily stepped out, both dressed as if for a meeting, not a visit. Emily's heels clicked sharply on the stone path. Joshua carried a folder under his arm. He barely looked at the house this time. He walked straight toward me, his jaw tight. Mom, we need to talk. I motioned for them to come inside. They sat at the dining table where sunlight fell in long, quiet strips across the floor. Emily began before I could speak. We were shocked by your decision. You didn't even tell us about the inheritance. You made a will without consulting us. Why would I? I asked calmly. You both made decisions without consulting me. Joshua opened his folder and laid out several papers. We just want to understand. This foundation, this Hansen fund, is a good idea, but it doesn't make sense to leave nothing to family. People will think I've done something terrible. I looked at him evenly. People will think what the truth tells them. He exhaled sharply, as if trying to hold back anger. Mom, you're making it sound like I used you. That's not fair. Fair, I said quietly, is a word people use when they've lost control of the situation. Emily leaned forward, her voice clipped and polished. You've misunderstood us, Mary. You took things too personally. The wedding, it wasn't about rejecting you. It was about presentation. My family wanted a certain image. So you erased me, I said. I understand perfectly. Joshua's voice broke through, strained. That's not what happened. Emily thought you'd be uncomfortable. I was uncomfortable, I said. Just not for the reason she imagined. He stared at the floor, and for a moment I almost softened. Almost. But years of being quiet had already cost me enough. I stood and walked to the sideboard, bringing back a small file folder. Here, I said. Since you're curious, this is the statement from my attorney. The fund is active. The first grants have already gone out. The money is working. Emily's mouth tightened. You gave it away? All of it? It was never meant to be hoarded, I replied. It was meant to mean something. Joshua looked helpless. And I don't. I met his eyes. You did. But then you stopped acting like family. The room went silent again. Outside, the lake shimmered under the early sun. I could hear the soft hum of distant boats being tested for the coming season. Finally Joshua said, You've changed. Yes, I said. I learned to stop mistaking guilt for love. He pushed back from the table and stood. So this is it? You're cutting me out of everything? I shook my head. I'm cutting you loose. You're free to build something on your own. You're not a child anymore. Emily stood too, clutching her purse like a weapon. You'll regret this, Mary. Family is everything. No, I said. Respect is everything. Family comes after that. Joshua's face flushed red. You can't just erase me from your life like this. I didn't raise my voice. I'm not erasing you, Joshua. I'm restoring myself. They stared at me, both stunned into silence. Then Emily turned sharply and walked out the door. Joshua hesitated a moment longer. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I know, I said. But meaning well isn't the same as doing right. When the door closed, I felt something settle inside me. A balance restored. That evening, I lit the fireplace and sat in the quiet. The room glowed warm and golden, the air faintly scented with cedar. I thought of every shift I'd worked, every dollar I'd saved, every night I'd prayed that my son would have more than I did. He did have more, but he forgot where it came from. Now I remembered for both of us. 2 weeks later, I got a letter from Mr. Reed. Joshua had tried to contest the will. His petition was denied almost immediately. The documentation was airtight. The story made it into the local paper. Adoptive mother stands her ground. I read it once, then tucked it away. A few days after that, Joshua posted a video online. He looked tired, older. In the video, he said he had acted like money was love, and that he was learning to be a better man. The clip spread fast. People praised his honesty. I watched it once silently, then turned off the computer. When a reporter called asking for comment, I said only one sentence. Repentance isn't a ticket back. It's just the start of growing up. After that, the calls stopped. The noise faded for good. That summer, I took morning walks along the lake with my dog, a golden mutt from the shelter. The water smelled of sun and salt. My neighbors waved, and sometimes I waved back. The foundation grew slowly, steady as a heartbeat. Every month I received new letters, mothers, nurses, teachers, each with their own story of holding a child not born to them and loving that child anyway. In the evenings, I cooked small dinners and ate by the window. The house stayed quiet but not lonely. Loneliness is emptiness without purpose. This was peace. Once in late August, a letter came with no return address. The handwriting was unmistakable, Joshua's. Inside was a short note. Mom, I'm in therapy now. Emily left. I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm trying to understand it. I hope you're well. I hope you're happy. I folded the letter and set it by the lamp. I didn't cry. I didn't write back either. Some lessons must finish in silence. As the sun went down, the water outside turned the color of gold leaf. I watched the light shift and thought of all the years I'd spent mistaking sacrifice for love. Boundaries, I had learned, are not walls. They are doors, and sometimes the kindest thing you can do is close one. That night, I whispered the words that had carried me through every trial, every betrayal, every quiet victory. My money is off the table. Then I turned off the light and peace at last stayed. By the following winter, the snow had returned. It blanketed the lake in a stillness so deep that sound itself seemed to disappear. I spent most mornings by the window with my coffee, my dog at my feet, watching the world go white. It had been nearly a year since Joshua's visit. The ache had dulled into something quieter, an emptiness that no longer hurt to touch. Then one evening, just as I was turning off the lights, my phone buzzed with a message from Mr. Reed. You might want to see this. It was a link to a video. Joshua's face appeared on the screen, pale and thinner than I remembered. He was sitting in front of a plain gray wall, speaking slowly, carefully. My name is Joshua Hansen, he said. And I need to say something I should have said a long time ago. I acted like money was love. I confused gratitude with guilt, and I treated the person who raised me like a bank instead of a mother. He paused, then, eyes glassy. If you're watching this, Mom, I'm sorry. The clip ended there. No music, no drama, just silence. I closed the phone and sat very still. Outside, the wind picked up, scattering snow against the glass. I felt neither anger nor relief. Regret, when genuine, is quiet. It doesn't beg. It doesn't barter. It simply sits beside you and waits to be believed. The next morning, I began receiving calls from people I barely knew. Old coworkers, neighbors, even strangers who had seen the video online. They called it brave. They said they admired him. Some asked how I felt. I told them the truth. Repentance isn't a ticket back, I said. It's just the start of growing up. Within a week, the story made local headlines. Adoptive mother stands her ground. Reporters tried to frame it as forgiveness or reconciliation, but that wasn't it. What happened between Joshua and me wasn't about apologies. It was about clarity. The foundation continued to grow. Donations arrived from unexpected places. Small checks, handwritten notes, stories from women who had seen themselves in mine. A teacher from Illinois wrote, "You helped me remember that love isn't charity. It's commitment." A nurse in Ohio wrote, "Because of your fund, I kept my house." Each letter reminded me that boundaries don't destroy love. They define it. Months passed. I heard nothing more from Joshua. Then, in late spring, I received an official notice from the county court. Joshua had tried to contest the will. I drove to the courthouse on a bright, cool morning. The air smelled of lilacs blooming early. Inside, everything was quiet. Just the shuffle of papers, the hum of fluorescent lights. Joshua sat on the other side of the room with a lawyer I didn't recognize. When our eyes met, he looked down. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, read through the documents carefully. She asked a few questions, mostly procedural. Then she looked at me. "Mrs. Hansen, is this your signature?" "Yes, Your Honor." "Did you make these changes of your own free will?" "I did." She nodded once and closed the folder. "Then this matter is settled. The will stands." Joshua's lawyer tried to speak again, but the judge lifted her hand. "There's nothing further to discuss. The document is clear." And that was it. Years of silence, confusion, and misplaced guilt condensed into 10 minutes of legal clarity. When we left the courtroom, Joshua stopped me in the hallway. "Mom, please, can we talk?" I shook my head gently. "There's nothing left to explain." He reached for my arm but stopped himself halfway. "I just wanted you to know I understand now. You gave me everything." "No," I said. "I gave you a start. The rest was up to you." He nodded slowly, eyes wet, then turned and walked away. I watched him disappear into the crowd, a grown man finally learning what it meant to stand on his own feet. That evening, the story reached the news again. They used words like courageous and heartbreaking. Some people called me cold. Others called me strong. I didn't correct them. The truth didn't need adjectives. Over the next few months, the noise faded. The video stopped circulating. People moved on. Life as it does became ordinary again. I watered my plants, walked my dog, and went to the local library on Tuesdays. I cooked small dinners and ate in silence, which no longer felt like punishment. Sometimes I caught myself remembering Joshua as a boy, the way he used to run down the hallway in socked feet, sliding across the linoleum laughing. The way he'd whisper "don't leave" when I tucked him in before my night shifts. I would never erase those memories. They were still true. They just no longer ruled me. That fall, the foundation hosted its first small gathering at a community center in Madison. 15 women came, teachers, nurses, single mothers, each holding a photograph of the child she'd chosen to raise. When I stood to speak, I didn't mention Joshua's name. I simply said, "Sometimes love means walking away before it destroys you." Afterward, one young woman came up to me. She was maybe 30, with tired eyes and a baby asleep on her shoulder. "You don't know me," she said softly, "but I read about you. My son isn't mine by blood, but he's mine in every other way. Your story kept me from giving up." I touched her arm and smiled. That's what it's for. Driving home that night, I thought of Joshua again. Not with anger, but with the kind of distant affection you feel for someone you finally understand. People grow in their own time, I told myself. Some late, some never. But they all grow best when you stop holding them up. When I got home, the mailbox held a single envelope with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note. "Mom, the foundation is good. You were right about everything. I'm learning. Please take care of yourself." I folded the paper and set it on the mantel beside a photograph of him at age 6, holding a model airplane we built together. The edges of the picture were worn, the colors faded, but his smile was still bright. For a long moment I just looked at it. Then I whispered, "Let him grow up." Outside, the wind shifted, and the sound of the lake returned, steady, rhythmic, alive. I poured myself a cup of tea and sat by the fire, feeling something rare and solid settle deep inside me. Not triumph, not even forgiveness, just peace, the kind that comes when truth no longer hurts to say aloud. By 2022, I had begun a new chapter. The foundation was steady, the letters of gratitude kept coming, and the seasons moved again in a rhythm that made sense. I sold the lake house in Wisconsin and moved west, to Portland, Oregon, where the air smelled of pine and salt, and the ocean looked like brushed steel beneath the fog. The move wasn't about escape. It was about distance, the kind that allows healing to stretch out and breathe. I found a small single-story house near the coast. White shingles, a narrow porch, a garden that had been left to weeds. I planted lavender, hydrangeas, and 2 rows of tomatoes. Felt good to make something grow again. The neighbors were kind in the quiet way I preferred. They waved from their porches, brought lemons from their trees, and never asked about my past. Silence in this small town was its own form of respect. Each morning I walked the beach with my dog, Lucy. She chased gulls and dug at the wet sand while I watched the tide erase yesterday's footprints. The sound of the water reminded me that everything moves forward, whether you are ready or not. Sometimes I saw young families along the shore, parents balancing strollers, children tossing shells into the surf, and I felt a brief, soft ache for what I once believed my life would look like. But it passed quickly. I had already lived the story I was meant to live. Now I was learning peace. The foundation grew quietly. Through a small network of social workers and volunteers, we reached women across the country. Teachers, nurses, foster mothers, each raising a child not born to them. Many sent letters. Some included photographs. Tiny hands, birthday candles, front porch smiles. One note from a mother in Racine said, "Because of you, my daughter can join the school orchestra." I pinned that note above my desk. It reminded me that something good can still grow from loss. That spring, Mr. Reed retired. His successor, a young attorney named Allison Gwynn, called to introduce herself. "Your records are immaculate," she said with a laugh. "Mr. Reed told me you're one of his most disciplined clients." I had to learn discipline, I told her. It's what keeps generosity honest. She paused for a moment, then said quietly, "That's a beautiful way to put it." After that call, I sat for a long time at the kitchen table, listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of the clock, Lucy's slow breathing at my feet. The house no longer felt empty. simply felt mine. That summer, I began volunteering once a week at the local shelter, helping with paperwork and donations. Most of the staff didn't know my story, and I didn't offer it. It was enough to be useful. To hand out food vouchers. To help a young woman fill out a form for medical assistance. To see her shoulders drop when she realized someone was listening. On weekends, I drove up the coast to small towns with quiet harbors and wooden piers. I sat with a notebook, jotting down ideas for expanding the foundation. A small program for adoptive families in Oregon, perhaps. Workshops on financial independence. Practical things. One evening, while watching the sun fall into the ocean, I thought about all the years I'd spent mistaking sacrifice for love. It struck me that boundaries are not the end of giving. They are the structure that makes giving real. My money is off the table, I whispered to the wind, though now the words meant more than money. They meant time, energy, and every part of myself I used to give away just to be seen. The tide kept coming in. The air grew colder, but I stayed until the last light slipped under the horizon. For the first time in many years, I felt entirely at ease with the idea that not every story needs repairing. Some are meant to close quietly, without apology. When I got home, Lucy was waiting by the door, tail thumping against the wall. I cooked a small dinner, lit a single candle, and ate by the window while the waves glimmered silver in the dark. Peace didn't announce itself. It simply arrived, unhurried, unasked for, steady as the tide. And for the first time, I understood that the truest form of love is not endless giving. It is knowing when to stop. The years after Portland arranged themselves like steady waves, one following another without surprise, without hurry. My hair turned fully white. I cut it short so the sea wind could do what it wanted without making a mess of me. Mornings began with Lucy's nails tapping the hallway, the kettle's thin whistle, and the light lifting itself slowly over the water. I kept the garden small on purpose. Lavender that perfumed the air, hydrangeas that bowed under their own weight, 2 tomato rows that asked nothing except patience and sun. The foundation crossed its 100th grant with little ceremony. I marked it by sharpening a pencil and balancing the ledger. Numbers, when you let them, tell the truth without raising their voice. A teacher in Peoria. A nurse in Tacoma. A grandmother in El Paso. Line by line, month by month, the work held. Sometimes women stopped by the house when they were in town. They came modestly, carrying plastic binders and tired smiles. One brought her son, 8 years old, gap-toothed and curious. He ran from room to room as if joy were a job someone had hired him to do. When they left, the house kept a trace of their voices the rest of the day. In the quiet that followed, I understood that peace is not the absence of sound. It is the absence of bargaining. On foggy afternoons, I sorted old photographs at the kitchen table. There was Joshua at 6 with a paper crown from a birthday cake. Joshua at 10, skinned knees and a crooked grin. Joshua at 22 in a cap and gown, shaking my hand like we were colleagues. I did not hide those pictures. I put them in a new album labeled simply Record. Inside the cover I wrote, "Love is true. Dead is separate." Then I slid the book onto the shelf by the door, where morning light could find it but no one was required to touch it. I learned small economies that had nothing to do with money. Fewer explanations. Fewer rescues. Fewer rehearsed apologies for choosing my own time. If a request reached me that smelled like a test or a trap, I answered with the line that had become my hinge. My money is off the table. The words were plain, but they carried all the weight I needed. Over time they came to mean more than dollars. They meant breath, sleep, and the hour between supper and dusk that I kept for myself. Late in summer, after a morning of weeding and a simple lunch, I found an envelope at the door, plain paper, careful hand. The name on it was mine. The handwriting was Joshua's. I stood there a long moment before I opened it, the dog nosing my knee, the sea moving in its patient way beyond the hedge. "Mom, I'm working with a youth program now. We help kids who age out of foster care. I think of you every time one of them walks through the door. You taught me how much one person's effort can change a life. I know I can't make up for what I did, but I can carry the lesson forward. Thank you. I hope the sea is kind to you. Joshua." I read it once, then again, slower. No demands. No math. No promise woven like a hook through the middle of a compliment. Just a fact, a lesson carried on. Regret, when it is real, does not ask for terms. It sets its own chair a little apart and waits. I did not write back. Not from anger. From understanding. Some distances are structural. They keep the house standing. In the old days I would have hurried to bridge the gap. Packed a box, dialed a number, made a plan. Now I set the letter beside the ledger, and let it be proof that growth can happen without supervision. That evening the fog burned off early. I walked the beach at low tide while Lucy chased plovers with the serious joy only dogs possess. The water wrote and unwrote our footprints. I thought of the courtroom, the video, the headlines that had made noise for a season and then gone quiet. Time had sifted everything into piles that made sense. What was mine to hold, what was mine to release, what was never mine at all. Back home I rinsed sand from my shoes and lit the fireplace. The flame took on the first strike, then steadied. I cooked a small supper, set one plate, poured tea. At the window the ocean lifted and landed, as if rehearsing the same simple answer to every question I had ever asked. Before bed I took the letter from the table and slid it into the album marked record. It belonged there with the photographs, not an opening, not a door, just a page. I closed the cover and felt the clean click of it finding its place. People like to think endings come with music or with witnesses. I have learned they arrive in the kitchen at ordinary hours. The kettle sighs, the dog settles, the ledger closes. You breathe once without counting. You do not reach for the phone. I stood by the back door a while longer, hand on the frame, listening to the night. The garden was dark and useful. Somewhere a buoy bell answered the tide. I said the words that had built the shape of my days and would carry me the rest of the way. Not harshly, not for defense, only as a statement of fact. My money is off the table. Then I turned out the lights. The house held. The sea kept its rhythm. And peace remained, like a faithful thing that had finally come home. The years that followed were slower but not smaller. Peace, I learned, does not stay still, it changes texture. It seeps into the corners of life until everything, even solitude, feels inhabited. By 2030, the foundation had grown beyond anything I had imagined. New trustees ran the daily work. They sent quarterly summaries, polite and precise. Balances, grants issued, letters received. I read them carefully, the way I once read patient charts, finding comfort in exact numbers and simple facts. I was 77 that spring. My body had grown honest with me. Slower to rise, quicker to tire, but steady enough for what mattered. Lucy, older too, followed me everywhere, her fur now white around the muzzle. She no longer chased birds, just walked beside me, content to watch the sea do the running for her. Every few months, I still received a short letter from Joshua. He never asked for anything. He only reported small truths. The youth center expanded. One of our kids got into college. I'm learning carpentry, it helps me think. His handwriting was calmer now, the script of someone who had stopped explaining himself. I never replied. I didn't need to. Between us, silence had become fluent. One autumn evening, as the light thinned early and the ocean turned copper, I opened the box labeled record. Inside lay the photographs, the first foundation receipts, and Joshua's letter, the one that had arrived years before, signed, "I hope the sea is kind to you." I ran my fingers across the page, the paper softened by time. I smiled because it had been. I placed the box on the table and opened a fresh notebook, my new ledger. At the top of the first page I wrote a single sentence. Peace is not a miracle. It is bookkeeping. Then, line by line, I began to write what I had learned. Every debt of love must balance with truth. Helping is holy only when it is chosen. Silence can be kindness. Boundaries are proof of faith, not fear. When I finished, the page looked plain, almost mathematical. But to me it read like scripture. Outside, rain began to fall, steady and fine. The smell of wet lavender drifted through the open window. I made tea and sat by the fireplace, my ledger open on my lap. Lucy rested her head on my foot. The world was quiet but not empty. At some point I must have dozed off because I dreamed of water, endless and calm, and of a boy running along the shore, his laughter rising and falling with the tide. In the dream I didn't call out to him. I only watched. He looked back once, smiled and kept running. When I woke, the fire had burned low, glowing softly in the grate. I closed the notebook, slid it into the box, and carried it to the desk by the window. The horizon was lifting from night into silver daylight. I stood there for a long time watching the sky brighten. It struck me then that life at its end should look like a balanced page. Not empty, not overdrawn, but exact. Everything accounted for. In the quiet, I whispered one final truth to the room. I gave what I could. I kept what I needed. And in the end, that was enough. The kettle whistled softly behind me. Lucy stirred, stretched, and waited for her morning walk. I smiled, reached for my coat, and opened the door. The air was cool, the sky clear, and the sea kind, just as he had wished it to be.